Our guest today is Ivan Fedorov, mayor of Melitopol. My first question for you is that aggressor state, Russia that is, celebrated their day, Russia Day in Melitopol. How did it go? Were there any provocations? Did Russian troops, the occupants, organize anything? Yes, they were trying to organize a public holiday on the territory of temporarily occupied Melitopol. They failed though. They failed because people decided to stay away from this holiday. There were fewer people in the park than during an ordinary peaceful working day. They were trying to make a pompous ceremony by issuing and handing out Russian passports. But there were a mere 15 people willing to receive such a passport. And of course, the culmination was the provocation that was organized by the Russian troops themselves. So that was an explosion next to the office which they took over. The office is based in the city center. I'm going to talk more about this explosion, this terroristic attack, because this was organized by the Russian troops themselves. The reason I'm so sure that they organized it, it happened next to the office where they temporarily have the Ministry of Interior of the Russian Federation. So this facility has very good security, and there are armed officers guarding the office. So ordinary people cannot even approach this office, to say nothing about getting inside. The explosion was in a trash been 10 centimeters away from the entrance. So they should have seen if there was someone that placed this explosive device. After that, they organized this accident. Of course, they blamed it on the guerrilla movement that is now active on the territory of Melitopol. Civilians and collaborators both suffered. We know that they are trying to get rid of the people who are problematic to them among the collaborators. And I believe that that was the culmination of their public holiday organized at the territory of our city. Could you tell us more about the Ukrainian resilience and resistance in the city and the reaction of the Russians to that? An hour ago or so, I talked to people of our city who left the temporarily occupied city. The resistance is only growing. People who were initially um, perceptive to the Russian occupation. Today, they are totally against it because the narratives that they are trying to impose on the people, these are narratives of the Soviet Union, and this is something that our people cannot possibly accept. The resistance began since day one of the occupation when our people joined rallies. These were peaceful protests, peaceful rallies in the central part of the city. When Russians tried to dismiss those meetings, they started abducting people. So this resistance is non-public anymore, but it went into the guerrilla movement, converted into guerrilla movement, who are trying to help the armed forces of Ukraine and special forces of Ukraine. And as of today, this resistance is quite active. So they are trying to stop the trains, they are trying to create obstacles on the railway. So there are, let's say, local points where these guerrilla movements are active. 98% of Melitopol people are waiting for the city to be deoccupied and for Ukrainian armed forces enter the city. I got to know today that Melitopol people are boycotting the food stores opened by the Russians. They actually took over the chain of supermarkets called ATB. People refuse to buy groceries there because this is their way to resist the collaborators. We have a question for you. Andriy Shevchenko, Media Center Ukraine. My question for you is about the Russian plans regarding Ukrainian South. We hear lots of news about issuing passports, about attempts to organize referendum to join Russia. Do you have a picture? Do you have an idea about the plans of Russia regarding Melitopol and Ukrainian South in general, in principle? What do they want to do there? When we are talking about the plans of Russia regarding Ukrainian South, we should not only talk about Melitopol or South. These are the plans for the whole of Ukraine. And I don't think that it is restricted to Melitopol or the South or Berdyansk. They want to occupy the whole of Ukraine and they want to make it second pseudo Belarus. But unfortunately, they are failing, and that's why they are not trying to organize referendums anymore. At least they have taken their time. So they failed to build at least one effective system on the territory of the occupied territories. Neither financial, nor law enforcement, nor municipal government, because there is resistance from the residents of occupied cities. This is totally different from what happened in Crimea 2014 or Donbass 2014. There was support of the local people, and people of those territories actually took the Russian side, so they supported the Russian aggressor back then. But this is not the case now and here. Therefore, the question is, what can they do with the temporarily occupied territories and cities? Speaking of the referendum, we have to understand that a lot will depend on the order that will be issued by the leadership in Kremlin. If they say that tomorrow there has to be referendum, of course they will organize pseudo referendum, and they will create a nice picture that people are electing the new mayor of Melitopol, DPR or LPR, and they are happy. But this has nothing to do with the real situation, with the truth. Therefore, the trend of Russia today is to put the resistance and the war on pause and try to trade off with the rest of the world, trade off the sanctions, territories, etc., you name it. But I don't see any decisive steps from their side. I don't think that they will want to leave the war in the status it is at right now on the territories that have already been occupied by the Russians. And I don't know if they are ready to stop this war and enter the negotiation phase. They don't have real plans. That's why we cannot foresee any actions from their side regarding plans or strategies. We have another question. My question for you is the following. You said that Russia doesn't have a clear plan about its future. It wants to leave things as they are now. So the territories that have been occupied, they will use to play poker and trade for the most advantageous situation and position for them. Same thing has happened with Donbass. So they took it over. They didn't want to advance. They have tried to create more or less professional army in 8 years. And out of 8 to 121% their army grew. So if Russia doesn't have a clear action plan, and those regions, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donbass, they don't actually need it. What is your question? Excuse me. My question is the following. Russia says, okay, the game is over, let's sit down and talk. Do you see such prospects after what they have done to Ukraine? I think that the situation in the front line is going to be the one that dictates what should be done next. They have Ukrainian troops have advanced to Orikhovo, Berdyansk, Melitopol. The more our military dictate the agenda, the more rationality, diplomacy, and agreements will work and will be effective. But we have to make all the investments into our victory at the front line. Ukraine will never capitulate. We will fight for each square centimeter of our territory. Thus, Russia is not ready for any dialogue. The leadership of Russia is still misled, and they don't understand that they will never achieve the goals that they have set, neither cultural nor national, none of the goals. Therefore, we have to ensure that we win in the front line. Later, we might try diplomacy and rational mechanisms. We all believe that Ukraine will exist. Ukraine will live and develop. Without Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, Donetsk, Ukraine is not possible, because no person, no businessman, no investor will invest a single hryvnia into Ukrainian territories before we get all our territories back. Because the trend will be the following: every 5-8 years, the enemy will invade, they will take 7%, 21% of our territory, and all the money invested is wasted. That's why we need to make sure that we restore our territorial integrity first. Melitopol sweet cherry, that was the product that was popular Ukraine-wide. How do Russians communicate with the Melitopol farmers? It's not a dialogue, it's monologue. Melitopol Sweet Cherry, it's a private company. And also there is the private farm and the private facility that are the main players in the market of sweet cherries. Both companies have been taken over, so they have appointed some false leadership, new owners of these companies. These cherries are shipped somewhere, and I have no idea where the proceeds go. Some of the cherry trees, sweet cherry trees, are sold for a mere 10 hryvnias, and I believe that 8 to 10 hryvnias, so this is the cost of harvesting 1 kilo of sweet cherries. So they actually harvest it and they take it to the territory of temporarily occupied Crimea and Russia. Unfortunately, we will not be able to taste our famous sweet Melitopol cherries. Thank you very much. Our guest was Ivan Fedorov, mayor of Melitopol. Our next guest is going to be Vadim Boychenko, mayor of